Title: The Edge of Nowhere. A small group of friends, Maya, Luke, Grace, and Aaron, decided to take a weekend trip into the mountains, far from the beaten path. They had heard whispers about an unseen place, a hidden valley deep in the forest where no maps led, no one ventured, and the locals warned against. But the friends were curious, always seeking adventure. They followed an old trail through thick pines, the air growing colder as they descended deeper into the forest. The path faded, and with it, the sun, now veiled by thick clouds. The trees grew taller, their trunks twisted in unnatural ways, their leaves heavy with a kind of dampness that didn't belong. By the time they reached the valley, the world felt wrong. The trees stood too still, their branches unnervingly silent. The earth beneath their feet was soft, almost like it couldn't hold itself together. The valley seemed to press in on them, as if the land itself was closing in around their camp. Despite the unease settling into their bones, they set up camp, brushing off the ominous feeling gnawing at their minds. They joked and laughed about the local legends, strange creatures, mysterious disappearances, but as the night deepened, so did the darkness around them. The fire crackled louder, but the warmth of the flames didn't reach the corners of the valley. Then they heard it, a low, strange hum that seemed to come from the earth itself, vibrating the air in a way that made their teeth ache. It started as a whisper, like a distant chant, but it grew louder, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from everywhere. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the trees, it was something alive. Aaron froze, staring into the darkness. "Did you see that?" His voice trembled. The others turned, but the shadows between the trees were empty, still. Luke laughed nervously. "It's just your mind playing tricks." But as he spoke, the trees around them seemed to shift, their trunks twisting, bending inward, unnaturally, like something unseen was pushing them toward the group. The air thickened. The hum grew louder, more urgent. The ground beneath their feet felt soft, as though it were shifting, sucking at their boots. They tried to move, but something was pulling them in like the earth was swallowing them whole. Panic took hold. Grace shouted for them to leave, but the trail they'd walked in on was no longer there. The valley had changed. The path that had led them in was gone. The firelight flickered and died. Then they saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the valley, tall, unnatural. It flickered in and out of existence as though it were made of static, a black shape against the dimming light. It had no face, just an empty void where eyes should have been. Its arms were too long, stretching and distorting at unnatural angles. It seemed to glide across the ground, moving toward them with impossible speed. Grace screamed, and that's when the others saw them, more shapes, creeping from the edges of the trees. There were no faces, no features, just tall, twisting forms flickering between visibility and nothingness. As the figures grew closer, the hum turned into voices, thousands of whispers like a chorus chanting, too quiet to make out the words, but their tone filled with hunger. "Run!" Maya screamed, but their legs wouldn't obey. It was as if the earth itself had gripped their ankles, pulling them deeper into the valley. The shadows moved closer, bending the air around them, warping the light. The creatures surrounded them, their limbs stretching impossibly long as they reached for the group, and then the ground seemed to collapse. The valley itself seemed to open up, pulling them into a black pit. One by one, the friends were swallowed into the shadows. First, Aaron, his screams cut short, as his body was pulled into the darkness, his face frozen in terror. Then Grace, Luke, and finally Maya, each of them disappearing without a trace. The last thing Maya saw before the darkness consumed her was the flickering shadow of one of the creatures, its empty eyes locking with hers. The hum reached a deafening crescendo, and then silence. The next morning, the valley was silent once more. The trees stood motionless, their branches hanging heavy and dark. There was no sign of the camp, no trace of the friends who had set up their fire and tents the night before. Only the faintest echo of whispers in the wind remained. The locals in the town nearby had heard the stories, but now they speak of the valley only in hushed tones. They no longer warn travelers to stay away. They don't need to. Those who wander too close to the valley never return. They become part of the valley, trapped forever, caught in the hum that still pulses deep beneath the earth. And sometimes, when the wind is still, if you listen closely, you can hear the whispers. A shadow waiting for the next soul to wander too far, to cross the threshold into the edge of nowhere.